This is a photograph of me moments before I crossed the finish line of the London Marathon last year. At this point, I had been running for over 4 hours. Everything hurt, and it was the most challenging race of my entire life. It's a popular bucket list achievement for sure. Many people dream of running this iconic marathon, and last year over 40,000 runners crossed the finish line. They each had their own reason to run. For me, my reason to run and what brought me to this place, running this race, was a terrifying and life-changing experience. So today I'd like to share with you all why I run. 8 years ago, I was performing as a dancer in a musical in London's West End. I was 22 years old, I was newlywed, and I was newly pregnant. So life was pretty exciting. And one night after the show finished, I went home, and my husband Rob picked me up from the train station. We went home, and we went to bed just like any other night. However, I will remember that night, probably for the rest of my life, because about an hour after falling asleep, I was woken up by a sound that I had never heard before. And it was Rob, and it sounded as though he was screaming. So I reached out with one arm to try and wake him, as I thought he was having a nightmare. But when I touched his body, I felt that his muscles were tense, solid like a rock. So I jumped out of bed, and I turned on the light, and that's when I saw that he was having a seizure. And for anyone who's ever seen anyone have a seizure, it's completely terrifying. He then fell out of bed onto the floor, and I stood there completely paralyzed in fear. I was unable to move, I was unable to breathe. And then when the adrenaline kicked in, I reached for my phone and I called 999. I waited for paramedics to arrive at our house, and we left home in an ambulance. So I answered all of their questions. They asked me, had he been drinking? Had he taken drugs? Had he suffered a head injury? Had he complained of feeling ill or unwell? And all of my answers were no. This made absolutely no sense to me because Rob was 29 years old, he was fit, he was healthy, he'd recently received a place in the London Marathon, and he'd actually been out running that day. So everything was fine, and I had no reason. It made no sense at all. We arrived at the hospital, and I was standing by Rob's bed waiting for him to go and have a CT scan, when suddenly his head went back, and it was that same sound again, and he started to have another seizure. This time I put my hands up to my face to cover my eyes, almost like when you're watching a scary film and you don't want to see the screen, because I didn't want to see that again. So I was asked to wait in the family waiting room, so that's what I did. I waited there for hours. I sat in my pajamas alone, and I just stared at the carpet and just replayed it over and over and over again. And I just thought, what am I doing here? Why did this happen? And what are we going to do now? So Rob was there for 2 weeks, and he was in a neurology ward where they did different tests, and they talked about things like stroke and tumor and words that you don't want to hear when you are incredibly anxious and afraid and pregnant. And what they concluded after 2 weeks was that Rob had suffered a spontaneous brain hemorrhage, which means he had had a burst blood vessel in his brain. There was no cause, hence no warning, and it can happen to anybody. It could happen to me, it could happen to you. So he was recovering well, and as my belly was getting bigger, we went home and we started to learn what this meant. Rob was taking painkillers, he was taking anti-seizure medication, and we started to look forward to the year ahead and started to look forward to the future, and he was recovering well, thank God. So I was on one hand feeling happy because they had told us that he was lucky. He was lucky to still be alive. So on one hand I was so happy, he was doing well, and I was pregnant, and I just couldn't wait to make big plans for the future, and I wanted to live life to the full now. But on the other hand, I now had this fear and anxiety around Rob's health that was just always there. And I just wanted him to stay home and to stay safe and just be careful and not do anything. So a few months later, our son Jude was born, and he is wonderful and he is beautiful, and he brought so much joy into our lives. But when Jude was just 8 months old, my worst fears and anxieties were brought to life one night when Rob had yet another seizure. Just as before, it was the middle of the night, but this time when I heard that sound, I ran. I ran out of our bedroom, and I'm actually ashamed to admit that, because when the fight or flight hormone kicked in, I just ran away. And then I stood outside our bedroom and I woke up. I started to wake up, and I had a moment where I had to say to myself, Adrienne, you have to go back in there. You can't leave him in there alone. So that's what I did. I forced myself to go back, and I reached for my phone again. I called for an ambulance and waited for paramedics again. This time I could hear Jude crying out from his cot, and I just couldn't believe that this was happening again. So we arrived back in hospital, and we learned that the bleed on the brain Rob had suffered the year before meant that he had now developed epilepsy. So the seizure was a result of that. So we had to learn what that meant for us as a family. We had to learn about epilepsy. We were meeting with an epilepsy nurse to talk about medication and treatment and triggers, things to avoid. So I was trying to take on as much information and learn as I could, but the more information that I learned, the more I felt afraid and overwhelmed. And I remember reading an article titled Living with Epilepsy. And I read that title, and this article was for partners, parents, and carers. And I thought, I don't want this. I don't want all of this. It's too much. It's too heavy. It's too scary. I don't want it. I literally just wanted to run away from it all, the responsibility. Then I started to feel guilt around that, because I thought, hang on a minute. How can you be feeling sorry for yourself right now? Rob is the one who has suffered, not you. Rob is the one taking medication. Rob is the one who can no longer drive his own car, or lock the door when he takes a shower, or bathe his own son. So how could you be feeling sorry for yourself? So I am somebody who's always had a lot of energy and enthusiasm for life, and I wanted to get some of that back. But I felt like I was in this downward spiral. Every night when I went to bed, I would be so afraid. I would pray that it wouldn't happen again, and I started taking sleeping tablets every night to sleep. So I thought something needs to change, and I knew that I couldn't change what had already happened to Rob. I knew that I couldn't change if it was going to happen again. The only thing that I could change was my attitude and my approach and my perspective. So, as I said, before this happened, I'd been a dancer. I was used to exercising and moving every day. And I knew that if I could exercise and move, that I would feel better, or at least have an hour of distraction. But at the time, I was reluctant to go out and leave Rob and Jude at home alone. What if I went out and he had another seizure? Not only would he be alone, but our young baby would now be alone too. So I tried to avoid doing that. But I thought, what if I just went out for a run, just for 10 minutes, then I'll be back. So that's what I did. I didn't have a fancy GPS watch. I didn't have any fancy running shoes. I just put on a pair of shorts and some trainers, and I went out for 10 minutes. So I'm not going to say that that run changed my life, or that I then signed up for the marathon, or that I fell in love with running. None of those things happened. None of those things happened. But that run wasn't about running at all. That run, for me, was about having 10 minutes that was just me on my own. I wasn't Jude's mummy. I wasn't worried about Rob. I could just have 10 minutes in the day when I could feel like I was just running away from all that fear and all that responsibility. And I started to really look forward to that 10-minute run. And when I went out in the morning, I would try and go a little bit further, or sometimes try and go a little bit faster. So I didn't acknowledge it at the time, but looking back now, I can see that running was really helping me to cope. So what is it about running particularly that was helping me? Why do so many people around the world run? And why do people say that running is addictive? Well, I'm going to explain what happens to you, to your body, when you run. I'm not a doctor, but this is just the basic chemistry. So, in the first few seconds that you start to run, your heart starts to beat faster because you need more blood pumping around to the muscles. Simple. Within the first few minutes that you start to run, you start to breathe heavier. So that faster, deeper breathing forces more oxygen into the body and to the brain. You feel the burst of energy. So when you first start to run, you get this burst of energy that you feel like you were born to run, and that is because your body knows, okay, I'm on the move, we're going to need some fuel, and so it starts to break down a substance called ADP to form ATP. You may remember learning about energy systems at school if you studied anatomy and physiology. Next, you feel the burn. Some people say that, feel the burn. And when you feel the burn, that is lactic acid in your muscles, but the burn is fine, you keep running. And lastly, when you finish running, your body is filled with endorphins and serotonin, and that's mood elevating. It feels good. The runner's high is real. So this is what I was experiencing every single time I went out to run. Running was changing both my body and my mind. So it's no wonder to say 8 years later that I am still running. I now run all around the world. I've become part of a huge running community, and I no longer run to get away from fear or anxiety. I now run to explore new places, I run to discover, and I run to connect. So last year when I ran the London Marathon, as I said, it was the toughest challenge of my life. But I knew that Rob and Jude were waiting for me at the finish line. And I also knew that Rob would rather be running than watching. He never got to run his place in 2011. So last year I was running for both of us. And when you run a marathon and you see the thousands of people and their different reasons for being there, you also see thousands of people there cheering on the street, standing there for hours, and they cheer for everyone. They cheer for every single runner, for strangers. It doesn't matter if you cross the finish line in 7 hours, if you cross the finish line in 3 hours. This 26.2-mile challenge remains the same, and you are a hero, and you're brave just for standing at the start line. So when you make it to the finish line, you are met with cheers, adoration. It is such a wonderful experience. And as Catherine Switzer said, if you are losing faith in human nature, go out and watch a marathon. So I know lots of people have different reasons for running, and I, as I said, am now part of a global community. I've started a blog, I use social media, and I connect with people from around the world, often people that I've never met before, but we are connected through this run of love of running. And often they share their stories with me, and I'd like to share 2 with you. This is Heidi. Heidi said, initially I started running to lose weight and to get in shape, but since then I have gained so much more. I am part of a community, I have made new friends, I've grown in confidence, and I now participate in new challenges that I never thought I could do. I love the freedom that running gives me. And she did lose a lot of weight too. I heard a story last week that was fascinating to me, and it was a man who had used running to overcome addiction and to completely transform his life. And at the age of 39, he weighed 200 pounds. He was a smoker. He was an alcoholic. And at one of his lowest points one day, he laced up a pair of shoes in an attempt to change his life. Years later, at the age of 46, he broke the record for the 45 to 49-year-old 5,000-meter American track record. Proof that you are never too old to become a runner. So you may be thinking, okay, cool, running worked for you, but you are more young and you look like a runner. But what does a runner look like? Well, let me tell you something. You look like a runner too. The running community is incredibly encouraging and inclusive. It doesn't matter your age, gender, ability, size, race. If you run for 5 minutes, if you run for 5 miles, if you run, you are a runner. And lastly, I'd like to say that there is no right or wrong way. There's no right reason to get into running. Often some people do start running to take control of their body. Sometimes it is to take control of their mind and to achieve and to be a part of a community. Sometimes I run still to get away from my emails, my phone, stress. Sometimes I run to explore a new city. Sometimes I run just because I can and because I appreciate and acknowledge that my body is healthy and strong, and I will not take that for granted. So what happened to my husband 8 years ago is a part of my story, but it is not the defining chapter. Without a doubt, it changed both of our lives and our attitudes to living. But that night, as well as teaching me that life is unpredictable, that unpredictability no longer scares me. it now inspires me. Life is so short and the world so wide. I will never see it all if I'm standing still. So now I'm running. Thank you.